So we'll jump over to Matt's meandrous mumblings. This one is meandrous as it gets. This is something I wrote down in my possible topics because I saw something online and it interested me because it was something I had never thought of. And so I'm going to let you guys into that discovery, which you might look at me funny because you're like, yeah, that was obviously the point behind that scene or storytelling device, but I never got it. So obviously Lord of the Rings, spoilers for Lord of the Rings, if people haven't seen those films or read those books. At the end of Return of the King, or towards the end, Frodo turns. He's right there in Mount Doom, about to throw the ring, and then he says no, and he doesn't. Then what happens is Gollum comes and jumps on him and bites his finger off and falls. And now that he has the ring, his journey is complete and he no longer cares about anything and falls into the fires of Mount Doom, destroying the ring and himself. And, you know, that's how it ended. So I've always seen that scene as power corrupts. And I think, although Tolkien has said the Lord of the Rings was not meant to be allegorical at all, I do feel like there's a lot of messages and lessons to be learned. And I've always taken that scene as that even the purest of pure Frodo, who is tasked with doing this because, you know, he was seen as one of the only people that could. He was incorruptible. Eventually, he too succumbs to the draw of power. And it's only that somebody else was further down that journey that stopped Frodo's demise. That's how I looked at it. Gollum couldn't escape what he was. And we saw that, you know, throughout the second and third movie and book. But I had somebody point out to me that the reason why that happened isn't just because Gollum succumbed to the draw of power, but it's actually who Frodo is that saves himself in turn, because it's Frodo's idea to save Gollum's life, and out of the compassion and seeing that, you know, they're not so different, Gollum and he, and, you know, taking pity on the creature, in turn, it comes around that Gollum ends up saving Frodo's life, or in some fashion, or saving the entire world. It's Frodo's compassion, which was the initial point and why he was given the ring. It's because he was the only one who could do it. He was kind-hearted. He was seen as incorruptible. And it turns out that that same compassion that he had is what ends up being the difference. I had never looked at it that way, that, you know, Frodo's past deeds save him in the end when he's no longer able to act responsibly is the wrong word, but morally just, I guess, for lack of a better word. And so, you know, this sort of changed my whole perspective on Frodo's actions and, you know, the tension between Sam and he, and even the relationship with Gollum, because everything that they go through from sparing Gollum's life, that's all Frodo doing the right thing and setting up, you know, later on he'll be rewarded for that, even though that's not why he did it. He did it because it was the right thing. But, you know, in life, there is sometimes a reward for doing the right thing. You know, so I thought it was interesting to see that scene from a new perspective. So first, what are you guys' thoughts on that? Do you think I'm an idiot for not seeing that beforehand, or what were your initial thoughts of that scene?
No, like, honestly, I've never thought about it like that either, where it's like Frodo's prior actions are what saves him later. I think, like, when you were talking about that, it reminded me of the scene where they first see Gollum in the Mines of Moria. And it's like Frodo says to Gandalf, like, it's a pity Bilbo didn't kill him. And like Gandalf says to him, like pity is what saved him. Like, yeah, it was Bilbo's pity for him that stopped him from killing him. And then he says, like, I feel as though he still has a part to play in the story.
Right.
And then that almost, it's like every single time Frodo sees him afterwards, you kind of get that same sort of feeling. He's taking Gandalf's position now. Like, yeah. And it's almost like their roles are reversed, where Sam has the position that Frodo had, where it's like, we should get rid of him and kill him, or like maybe not kill him, but like, we should definitely not be with this guy. And Frodo's the one that, like, he sees him, maybe because he's already been carrying the ring for a while, but like, he sees what it's done to him, and he sees him more as Smeagol than Gollum.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas Sam is like anti.
Yeah, Sam is operating out of fear, whereas Frodo tries to have some understanding and compassion and empathy, I guess, towards Gollum or Smeagol. Yeah, Frodo's succeeded because he was an empath. Oh my god. Also, though, something Gandalf says there is like stuck with me for a long time. Is that I'm paraphrasing, but some of those who are alive deserve death, and some of those who have died deserve life. Can you give it to them? And Frodo's like, oh shit, I'm the dick. But yeah, Will, what were your thoughts on that scene?
I always thought of it as just like that's just like the center, like the magnetic pole of evil, like in Middle Earth at the time, because that's where the One Ring was created, made by like the second most evil character in the entire universe. So I just thought that like even like Frodo's, I guess, inner strength and stuff like that just couldn't withstand just being there, like even just for like a moment. Like it seemed like I just took it as it's just like he was getting hit with, I guess, like a wave of evil that was just like invisible, bad vibes all around. It's just like, and he just like Frodo just like eased up for a second, and then that was just all it took. So that's the way I always thought. Like I always viewed it. It's just like, how could you not be corrupted in that moment, in that place, I guess. But yeah, I don't know, that's just the way I always took it. And like Smeagol jumping on his back was kind of like a distraction away from all the bad vibes.
Yeah. See,
as an empath he was feeling.
I remember like being younger and that happening, like so there's a thing with Pixar. So this is a little bit of a tangent, but just for writing in general, I use this same idea when I'm, running games in D&D and stuff, is that your characters can get into trouble by a coincidence, but they can't get out of trouble by coincidence. That's lazy writing. So, watching that when I was younger felt that way, in that, oh, now here's the exact moment where Smeagol betrays them and bites his finger off. That's convenient because they would have lost. When you're younger, you don't really care about those things, but that's why I sort of looked into it a little bit deeper when I was older and been like, oh, the point of this scene is to say that power corrupts ultimately. And now, having this different perspective on it, I now see it a little bit differently as well. But I think like looking at it in a way that's just like, oh, it's just like for the suspense of the moment to be like, what, they're going to lose after all? And, oh, here comes Gollum, but now when I see it from the perspective of like, it's the compassion that Frodo had before, which then comes in and saves them. Now I don't mind it, because now it's no longer coincidence. It's, it's because that was set up before. It's because, the pity that he showed him that, turns out to, like you say, play a part in the story still. So I don't know. I've always loved Lord of the Rings. I always loved Gollum, the character, and Frodo as a character, but that scene, for whatever reason, I've always felt the need to justify it. And now I don't. I'm like, oh, that was a really good way to set it up. Either way you look at it, like Frodo does eventually succumb. And, that's why at the end of Lord of the Rings, he has to leave, because he's forever changed. And, Tolkien saying that the Lord of the Rings is not allegorical, I think maybe he truly does believe that, or did believe that. I just think that's so wrong, because there's so much of it that's like points back to like his own experiences at war and stuff, and coming home as a changed person and not being able to go back to the life you once knew, whether that's metaphorical and your PTSD and trauma. But in the case of Lord of the Rings, it's, I literally can't go back to the Shire and pretend everything's all right with you people. I've seen too much and I've been corrupted. I need to go on my next journey, type of thing.
When he was talking about allegory, it was more like he didn't write it specifically like being like orcs represent Nazi Germany, like that.
Right. Yeah.
If you find parallels, like all stories have some kind of moral, some kind of message, and like if you can find parallels in the real world, like, yeah, you're creating the allegory. He just didn't intend to write it as that.
Yeah.
That's how I always understood it.
Yeah, I definitely see that's a really good understanding of that. I think I definitely see Frodo's journey as allegorical for his experience in the war. Whether that's intentional or not. I think, like you're saying, like sometimes our experiences, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, where talked about like cultures and what we know shows up in what we make, whether we intend it to or not. And I think just that alone, like putting something from our own lives into something, and it's not a one for one, that can become allegory.
That's like the definition.
Yeah, exactly. The tenor, and I can't remember what the other word is, but that serves as that sort of device. So yeah, I just thought it was cool to look at that scene in a new way. Have you guys ever had a similar experiences with a scene or a story that you've seen in a new light years later, or whatever the case is?
As you were saying that, it reminded me of a moment that just happened in Queen of Fire, which you might remember. So I'm currently, Valen has made it into the north, like into the ice, and he's met he's met the bear people and the wolf people. And there's like a scene where he has to try to convince like a large group of tribes people to join his cause. And the price that the chieftain asks in exchange for his people's loyalty is to have his woman. I don't know if you remember that scene. And instead of that, he pulls out a ruby that he's been carrying since like book 1, and that his song always told him not to get rid of. And now that he like doesn't have it, he says like, I hope this is the reason. I hope this moment is the reason it told me not to get rid of this ruby. Then he gives him the ruby, and that is enough for them to like exchange for their loyalty. And that was like that same kind of like something that happens in book 1 affecting like being a critical event in like, the end of the story. But something that I've seen multiple times that I like interpreted differently. It's a good question, because I've seen a lot of things many times.
Yeah.
Will, if you have an example, you can go ahead.
Okay. So I when you mentioned it earlier, I kind of thought of it just as like when you mentioned earlier that you wanted to have this as a discussion, I kind of thought a little bit differently.
That's okay.
I thought you meant just like kind of like just understanding. Well, I guess it is kind of the same, but like I thought it was like a little bit more like how one might understand like context and stuff like that a little bit.
Yeah, it totally is. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'll also, just as a side note, I thought you were gonna like talk about like the gifts that Galadriel gives. Because I see that.
Oh, you meant like subtext. Yeah. Okay.
So number 1, quick shout out, Jurassic Park. After reading the novel, which came before the films, helps like it totally changed the way that I saw like how the dinosaurs expanded all over the place. The novel gives a pretty good discussion about, or explanation on like how that happened scientifically, which I thought was pretty cool. Also because Michael Crichton's like an ultra genius, R.I.P.
Ultra genius.
Yeah, he was like a doctor and a lawyer and a bunch of other stuff all that within a few years. The other one actually is Dune. And like I don't want to
no book spoilies before. In case.
Yeah. Okay, so no, it's not a book spoil. It's just like, so I actually just rewatched the movie last night because I just got it on disc, the Denis Villeneuve copy. But I was watching like this film analysis, dude. It was on YouTube. Can't remember shoutouts, but you're like buried in my YouTube history, which is a demonic garbage pile. So, but I can't remember your name.
Why firebenders were right.
Justified. The firebending expansion was justified. No, he mentioned that there was like a shift in tone between the book and the movie, because one of the reasons why Frank Herbert made the book was kind of like he made it so that like so people would like kind of like second guess like charismatic leaders. And in the movies, like one of the opening lines, it's like the second line or Zendaya's Chani kind of mentions when she's talking about like the history of Arrakis. This guy noted that Denis Villeneuve kind of focused more on the oppression as like a tone, as opposed to like the feudal battles and like warring, as opposed like that we see in the books more. And like it kind of made me think, because like I mean throughout the, again, I don't want to go like too far and too deep into it, but like we focus so much like on like Zendaya drops that line, it's like the second line in the movie, but the rest of the movie where I think like we see Paul as like this kid and stuff like that, and there's a lot of foreshadowing and stuff that we hopefully get to see in later movies. But like it completely changed the way when I rewatched the movie, because like even though like House Atreides and like all of the retainers and all that stuff like that, even though they are like great people, there is still like there's not that much of a difference between them and the Harkonnens, because they're still like basically just continuing the same resource extractions. And like there's a line where Duke Leto is like, we still have to get like 50 like silos of spice out of here like within the same time frame as like the Harkonnens did. So
Right.
it kind of like, yeah, it just kind of changed the way how I saw the movie.
Yeah, even a good sort of example of recontextualizing things is reading Dune and the, I don't know what you call them, little excerpts that are before every chapter.
Yeah.
And they take like a retrospective look back at the story that we're reading in real time. And it's never good. It's always mistrust and traitorous sort of rhetoric around, you know, here's where the people who were around this person went wrong. This is how they believed him and they were wrong to do so. This is how this person betrayed this person, or this is the lie that this person told, and this is how you have to be aware of those. Which is like, I understand for the movie, and again, I think the film is perfect, but when you're selling it to a new audience, and you're trying to make something that's entertaining over a trilogy, there needs to be setup. We can't know how this thing wraps up before we start, right? So to go into that movie and being like, man, Paul is the sort of protagonist and the person we root behind, it's because, you know, in movies 2 or 3, the rug's going to get pulled out from under the audience, and we're going to see like characters like this, or more so individuals with this sort of way of thinking and, you know, manipulation. In when you talk about like how the Bene Gesserit set up what they're about to do, it's a cautionary tale more than it is one of heroics and you know, of a protagonist to like be inspired by or admire. It's more like, these are why individuals that do this type of stuff are dangerous. This is why you should avoid people who claim to be the Messiah, or claim to, you know, or scapegoat people, or whatever the case may be. It's because when you read it, you're like, what a hero, until the rug gets pulled under you. You're like, oh shit, I would have been one of those people who blindly followed this person because they said cool things.
Yeah. And like when I saw that in this unnamed YouTube video this guy mentioned, shout out, he like
I think it was Keep Making.
Might have been, yeah.
Just kidding.
Like I don't think that like that topic of like, I guess, oppression is like brought out again. I don't think it's mentioned whatsoever, because like Zendaya is like, I wonder who will our oppressors be next, and then like cut to like
Paul.
Yeah, Paul just like waking up.
Yeah.
And like for me, it just changed the entire way I saw the movie, and I just thought it was like, it's like something that like you can't unsee, or at least for me, especially like near the end with the fight with Jameis. And he's like, I have to do this. And it's like, well, do you really? And also like, you know, like the whole city of Arrakeen just got like fucking air stricken, because, and like this wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for this system that's put into place of like feudal houses and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
Like, you imagine like living on Arrakis? A would suck, but then also B, like your house gets nuked by like Harkonnens.
Yeah, people you've never, but I mean, it's like that really happens to people in the real world. Like, I don't care about side A or B, or especially when you talk about the sort of governing system in Dune. I don't care about individual A and individual B. I give two fucks. I don't even know their names. They just come here and they take our stuff. We don't like them, and if we rebel against them, they kill us. So I just keep my head down and okay, it's Sunday night. I'm going to bed, and boom, my whole entire block has been destroyed because Buddy A doesn't like Buddy B. And not even that those two guys had a feud between each other. It's these two guys' grandfathers. One of them said something disrespectful 100 years ago, and for the past 100 years, my whole family, generations of my family, have had to suffer for it. It's like, that's an allegory for sure. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts around it. But I feel like all of Dune is allegorical, and in that way, it's like Frank Herbert being like, here's all the shitty things that have happened in recent human history. Let's put some, space in there and make people see things from a new perspective for once. It's been really cool to read Dune and not just see it for the sci-fi experience that it is, like the epic scale of it, but also see it as, wow, this is really potent cautionary tale.
Yeah, I've been loving the book. Like, for me, the book so far, like what the movie did for sci-fi cinema, the book is doing for like my experience of sci-fi literature, just on a way bigger scale.
Yeah.
But for me, a movie that I saw, and after talking to you guys, The Green Knight.
Right. Yeah.
For me, was just like completely recontextualized as like, oh, okay, so none of the things we saw actually really happened if you kind of think about it. Like, I still haven't gone through my second rewatch, but like after we talked about it, I was like, okay, yeah, this entire movie is symbolic. Like,
yeah.
Like, I was taking things so literally because that's just how I was like experiencing it the first time. I was like, oh, these fantasy creatures are real, and just taking it at face value. Then talking about it is like, all of these things are just completely symbolic, and it just recontextualized everything that happened and like changed the character of Garwin for me completely.
Yeah. That was one too where it's like obviously like you're saying, Lugo, you go through it the first time and you're taking everything, because especially when it's a fantasy, like for us, we're ready to buy in whatever fantasy you put down. If it's weird or strange or divergent, it's like, yeah, I'm in. I'm like, show me what you got. And so when you get a movie like that one where it's so bizarre and so jarring and so discordant and disconnected, you're like, is this how this is supposed to be? And then when you have the I guess the revelation that like, oh, this is all symbolism and metaphor, then it's like, oh, okay, so the world that I know is not that much different from what I'm seeing on screen. I'm just seeing hallucinations or projections or whatever the case may be. Then you have to take back all that, high epic fantasy that you think you're going into, right? Because of what you see in like the trailers and even what you're seeing on screen is like, this is very epic stuff. But when you pull it back and you get that sort of explanation that like, yeah, none of this is really going on, then it sort of opens it up for even more dissection where it's like, oh, wow. Then what are those symbolism? Like, what does it mean then? And not just in the context of the film, but as the filmmakers, like, what is the intent here? So, that one was super interesting as well.
Yeah, it's definitely one I need to go back and rewatch just to like see how I feel about it now that I like see how I see the symbolism and like what I get out of it, just knowing that I shouldn't be like, I should be watching for like those small details. Like, so that is definitely one that I need to go back and it'll definitely be recontextualized.
Nice. But yeah, that'll do it for the meanders mumblings. Will, what are you wondering about this week?
Wondering. We're gonna keep surfing that Dune wave.
When he
okay. Yeah, so again,